Hello, Volnauts. We will get rolling in just a little bit. Have 3 items to discuss today. If you have any additional things, please add them to the agenda.
New attendee format, who dis?
Amanda's trying to get it rolled out across the working groups. It's easier to automate attendance tracking if we do it this way.
Fair.
So that's will eventually save me several hours a quarter tracking who was here.
Sorry, is there some new link or something we're supposed to go to, or okay.
Oh, okay. We just changed the table to log in.
Yeah, Zoom it's one of the most annoying things with Zoom is like the chat doesn't persist. It's so annoying.
Right. Indeed. We'll get started in just 1 minute. If you have any additional items to talk about, please put them in the open section. All right, folks, welcome to the July 28th edition of the Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group. I would kick this off asking, do we have anyone that is interested and able to help us take notes today and be our scribe?
Unrelated, real quick. It looks like people are adding updates to the wrong parts of the document. I see some people in the APAC call section and in the autofix SIG.
Right. Thank you, Chris. We're in neither of those calls. We're in the full working group call that is clearly labeled June 28th.
And I didn't know that 6 turned into June and 28th was 28th. Clearly.
Yeah. Now, if you want to go to Jonathan's meeting later today, that's cool. You can pre-seed yourself, but we're in this call. But do we have anyone that's interested in helping us take notes?
I could take notes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Next up on the agenda, do we have any new, thank you, Madison. Do we have anybody new to the group that wanted to introduce themselves and to say hello to us? Great. We'll kick it off. Do we have any of the sub projects here that wanted to provide the working group a status update of what they're doing? We've got the Jonathan's AutoFix SIG, if anyone from OpenVex or OSV is here. No updates?
I can give updates.
Okay, cool.
So we, as of the past couple weeks, we've been continuing to chew on the AutoFix disclosure proposal, including the flowchart. And then I've been actively writing code to automate disclosure. Some new bits of information that have come out that are going to complicate this a little bit further. Well, primary one, there was some active conversations with GitHub around being able to create private vulnerability PDRs, and then GitHub is going to offer an API for creating the private forks inside of PDRs. So that will help out with automation and automating disclosures, but they won't give a way to customize the name of the fork that you've created, which makes certain bits of automation more complicated, because for public pull requests and public, you can set a custom fork name and you can set a branch name, but if you can't control that, it makes tracking and regenerating fixes if you realize that you had a bug in your fix more complicated. So it's going to make stuff. Yeah. Anyways, we'll talk about that in the working group meeting. Other than that, no major updates on that topic. Okay.
Any
hang on,
questions for Jonathan about AutoFix? I would encourage, if you're interested, to show up to the call later today. Unfortunately, I have a collision, but I'll be there in spirit while I'm busy doing a supply chain audit. Any other sub projects here wanted to share updates? All right, we'll roll into 3 semi-related items. We talked about this in the OpenVex SIG call on Monday. First off, Cisco is holding a show and tell, kind of a demo day around all things VEX and CSAF. I've talked with Puerco over with the OpenVex spec and CTL, and we're, as a SIG, going to participate, but I would encourage anyone else interested to hear kind of state of the art of VEX and CSAF advisories, sign up for the summit, and you'll get details in the near future about kind of how they're going to conduct that. But anyone that's curious about VEX especially might be something interesting to monitor. I'll be there. Any questions about VEX Summit? All righty. In a semi-related note, I also work with an organization called FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. And they have kind of a board meeting twice a year, and that normally is coordinated with the CVE board meeting. And what they are thinking about is creating a brand new conference. The beta name is VulnCon. And the idea would be to get all of the different organizations related to vulnerability standards like CVSS, CVE, VEX, CSAF, anyone that has kind of a horse in the game of coordinated vulnerability disclosure would get together, and it would be a multi-day conference. And they're looking at sometime in the first quarter that they would probably be holding this. And I had shot a note out to the Slack channel, and I got some folks that expressed interest. Again, that's something I personally will probably be participating in, and I would invite this working group if we see value in kind of listening to and collaborating with all these different groups, folks like Oasis that own CSAF, or FIRST that runs a CVSS. I'm sure MITRE will be there, like the NVD folks. So if anyone's interested in kind of talking about this and participating, let me know. I'll kind of keep a soft list of names. And then as I get more as it gets more formal, I will share specifics with everybody so that you can see if you want to clear your calendars to participate in VulnCon. Any questions or comments about that? So far, I've had about a half dozen folks hit me up on Slack saying that they'd like to learn more. All right, then my final item is, and also very related note, Mr. Wheeler was approached by our friends at NIST. They are considering creating an NVD consortium. So a group of people that they could get feedback on the National Vulnerability Database about vulnerability disclosure and kind of vulnerability advisories. There will be publication in the U.S. Federal Register, which is a thing that the U.S. government publishes updates around activities. So I already expressed through David that this working group probably would love to be considered. I'm going to specifically reach out to my friends at OSV. We'll talk Thursday evening, I hope. And then the OpenVex people were agreeable and are interested in participating. And this would be a way, ideally, we can help influence them to be more friendly towards open source needs, our open source perspective, kind of the velocity and speed that we operate on, and kind of our methods like using Git repositories and that type of stuff. So I think it's a good opportunity to collaborate. And again, anyone interested, as that register notice goes out, I'll share with this group, and we can kind of get our ducks in a row and approach as using a single voice, talking with those folks. And I'll probably also reach out to Bressers and Kurt so that GSD is also aware. Any questions about NVD Consortium? All right. Well, somebody put TC39 TG3. Who would like to talk about that?
That would be me.
Cool. Take it away, Chris.
So for those that are not aware, TC39 is the standards body for JavaScript. And within that committee is task group 3, which is the security task group, which is program of the scope of work for that is, as you would imagine, all things related to security and JavaScript. And the group has not been meeting for quite some time, I think since 2021, because the chair of the group had suddenly disappeared, and they chose to not continue meeting without a chair, and nobody had been volunteering for a very long time until very recently, and that is to be confirmed. The chairs of the group have to be elected and confirmed by the technical committee as a whole, which is going to be in a couple weeks here. So hopefully that will be good. But the meeting commenced without the chairs anyway, was organized this week to discuss that and discuss, like, restarting this and what are the agenda topics and things that we want to tackle kind of first. One of those things was vulnerability disclosure. So I don't really have an agenda here for this group. I kind of just wanted to throw it out there and see, I don't know, any thoughts on that. I know this is OpenSSF. We're talking about open source software. But of course, the software is built on programming languages. And if programming languages themselves introduce a vulnerability, that, has a huge impact. So, the scope of work for the task group is also developing best practices for developing secure programs written in JavaScript and things like that. But there are a lot of interesting questions around vulnerability disclosure that are specific to, like, when they appear in a programming language or when they appear in, the language is constantly evolving, right? New proposals are coming in and implementations are happening, and browsers, vendors, and things like that, and nodes start to implement new features at what's called stage 3. And so, like, which is by stage 3, a proposal should be relatively flushed out and the spec should be relatively unchanging, except for like extreme things. But at any of these points, you could have vulnerability. So there are a lot of questions around that. How does that work? What's the visibility like for that? Because TC39, it's not anybody can be in there, but the bar is relatively low. Any company that wants to become an ECMA member or prospective member can be in there. So there's also questions about, okay, who is the group of people that would see potential vulnerabilities? Right now, there is no policy, right, which is not good. I don't expect the volume of these things to be high, but it's something that we need answers on. So I don't know. I'll leave it at that. Like I said, I don't have any agenda. I know that everybody's doing work and all kinds of other things and don't necessarily need to be worried about this, but I don't know. Thoughts, comments?
What do we think, crew? Sounds like a very interesting consulting opportunity, if nothing else. So something we feel aligns with our mission, and we could potentially add some value to help out the JavaScript ecosystem. Madison and I agree.
I would be happy to be involved in this in whatever capacity I can. Are there folks from NPM involved in this group in any way?
Most absolutely. You are a Microsoft employee, I take it?
I'm a GitHub employee, so yes.
Right. So GitHub was in the process of joining ECMA when they were acquired by Microsoft. And so the folks that were representing GitHub are now on the Microsoft delegate team. So some of your colleagues are in TC39. I don't remember which ones might be participating in the task group, but anybody who wants to be in the task group that's in TC39 could be participating. So if you were interested in participating, the first thing would be to reach out to your probably whoever the rep is for ECMA, but also the delegates, and I can tell you who those people are.
Yeah, that's fine. And we can follow up on the more specific stuff for me outside of this call too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I was mostly just curious in ensuring that those folks were already involved. I was hoping so.
Yeah, but you asked if there are folks specifically from NPM. Are you at like NPM itself or Node?
NPM itself. Mostly just curious.
I'm not sure.
Well, if there's value in that, we probably could help make a love connection, if nothing else.
But certainly a lot of there is definitely representation from Node folks. Yeah.
And I think definitely there's this group has some good materials that we could help share with that community to help them get set up, helping them develop a policy, help kind of talk about how different ecosystems and projects manage volume intake and coordination. We'd definitely be glad to kind of share our learnings. On a tangential note, maybe you and I should talk to David Wheeler and maybe also consult from the best practices working group. That I think there's potentially things in there we can also help share with that community, that some artifacts that they might want to consider creating for their contributors and collaborators, to help do things securely and tailor them for JavaScript. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to partner up and collaborate. Any other thoughts from the group here? If you could, just keep us appraised of, as they start to reform and get moving again, let us know when there might be a good opportunity to figure out some type of joint meeting or just a introduction call.
Sure. For just FYI, the proposed convener group for the task group to be confirmed is myself and Jordan Harband, who I think many of you probably know.
Excellent. So if anyone has further questions, reach out to Chris. We could talk about this on our Slack channel. I'm excited. I think it's a good opportunity to collaborate and help make the world a little bit better place through sharing vulns nicely. All righty. We'll move on to opens. I see Jonathan is a wellspring of meeting topics. If anyone has any other opens, please add them down in that section, and I will yield the floor to Jonathan, our resident human.
a little bit of a story on this one. External entity processing is a very old vulnerability. It's been well documented, well understood. It's basically a vulnerability. I mean, kind of the vulnerability at its root originates back with the XML standard, because the XML standard itself allows for, when parsing XML documents, to access arbitrary resources on the file system and from external resources, which leads to vulnerabilities such as you can use this as an attacker to exfiltrate the contents of files from the file system, or use it as a get-based server-side request forgery, and then build your own URL and then exfil the contents of the resource via either DNS or a GET request to an attacker server or whatever, yada 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 yada. Anyways, this vulnerability is built into the Java standard library by default, and I last year posed a question to the Oracle JDK team stating, hey, this is a pretty well-known vulnerability. It's documented in all these, documentation that you stated, like how to protect yourself against XXE, yada, yada, yada. But has there been a CVE assigned to this? And in general, the answer that I got from Oracle and a bunch of other Oracle primarily was, no, there is not. Yes, this is a known issue. No, we don't consider it a security vulnerability. It's a bug that we should fix and address via the JEP process. And, we will reach out to you when we've created a JEP for this, to actually remediate this, so that it's, secure by default. And so I've waited a year-ish and have yet to hear back from Oracle about a JEP actually being issued. And so I said, okay, fine. I moved forward with reaching out to the MITRE, to say, hey, I think this should get a CVE number for it, because it's, an ancient security vulnerability in the Java standard library. We should, if Oracle's not going to fix it, it still should be assigned a CVE number. So that, the blame is laid at the feet of the API authors, not at the feet of every single person consuming this API and using it and then realizing they've shot themselves in the foot. And the response from the CVE team is basically in agreement with Oracle that the vulnerability is, at its, just because it's not secure by default doesn't mean it's a vulnerability in the standard library. It's a vulnerability in everybody else's code, which seems like a very strange, this vulnerability has been the root of many a CVE, as anybody who's looked through a CVE database can attest to. And so they said, we're not going to assign a CVE on this basis. And so I moved forward with the, kind of wacky proposal of basically trying to leverage the CNA rules, because of how the CNA rules work, at least in my own interpretation. You have to be a code owner. If you're a code owner, you can assign a CVE for a code that you own, and you can become a code owner by shipping a product. And JDK is an open source library code base. So I basically, attempted to convince them to issue a CVE, and then, leverage some of the rules in the CVE rule book to communicate that as well. And the CVE board looked at the case and came back today and said, we will not be issuing a CVE for this vulnerability in accordance with the agreement with Oracle on this case, which is kind of annoying. So this is mostly just story time with Jonathan, and also maybe this is kind of a question to the working group. Thoughts on APIs being vulnerable in their default configuration, requiring opt-out to be secure. I guess that's the general Like, I'm of the opinion that if an API is insecure by default and lets you shoot yourself in the foot using it in the way that it was designed, it should be considered a vulnerability, and it should be something you should opt into the vulnerable behavior, not out of the vulnerable behavior. I don't know. Yeah. Crow.
So I'll start, and I see Mr. Mannion is also interested in maybe sharing a little. You're applying 2023 reasoning to practices that have existed for a while, and secure by default, while as a securityologist I love, is not always an option. But as we all evolve and grow, we're starting to learn and adapt. So I think this potentially could be a great topic if we actually do see VulnCon be a thing. I think this could be a great, like, birds of a feather or a panel discussion, and start that conversation about, how do we modernize and kind of keep that secure by default attitude, that, and, the CVE board has rules and they're there for a reason. There are other means to share vulnerability if it's that severe, but I think we might want to try to influence behavior, and opportunities where we ever have these forums like VulnCon or other areas. I think it'd be a great opportunity to get people together and start to debate and have that conversation. How do we make things more modernized and shift our perspective to be more customer sensitive, the user sensitive.
Right. And that was kind of the idea that I was trying to push here, is like, hey, I know this is an ancient vulnerability. I get that it's, it was written when it was written, and maybe we can't fix it immediately, but we should still be assigning a CVE number so that the fault kind of gets laid at the feet of whoever was the cause of the vulnerability, instead of blaming all the end users for not implementing it correctly. So I get what you're saying about it being a vulnerability stuck in time, sure, but I was hoping that the CVE board would be able to see the times have changed around our perspective around vulnerabilities, and be willing to consider assigning a CVE number in the light of our kind of current understanding of the way the world should be, ideally. I don't know. As two other hands.
Yep, Jason, and then Mr. Banyan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of get into look. It almost goes to a philosophical question: what's the purpose of a CVE in the first place, right? If you're going to create a CVE that we know will never be fixed, why do we create the CVE, right? Because the only way that the CVE could be fixed would be you'd have to do a Java major rev. So you'd have to do a Java 2, right? Because
I disagree with that.
Well, I mean, the reality is, like Crow was saying, like there's untold software that depends on the behavior as written, and like this isn't a configuration that like you change in a file. You have to actually change it in code. It's configuration that's set in code. So yes, it's a configuration, but it's a behavior in the library that's the standard library, and it's part of a standard. And in order to change that standard, you have to do, it's a breaking change, right? You can't just do a breaking change, regardless if it's making it more secure or not. That's a major rev, right? So
the counter to that is I can't imagine that it would be any more breaking than Project Jigsaw was in Java 9.
Right, true, but
I
think it's difficult, right? Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I also don't like kind of make work stuff though. Like if the question I'd have is, what's the end goal of making it other than to rub in an Oracle's face? Like what's the, because what's going to end up happening now, it's just a vulnerability that shows up on everybody's scan all the time, and then people who don't understand it are going to be constantly pushing people to fix things that they can't fix and all this jazz, right? So does it actually move things forward? That'd be my question.
Does it
Rant.
It would cause a harassing force towards Oracle to force them to fix it in the, like it would be laying at the JDK developers' feet multiple times by multiple people saying, hey, the CVE is still present and it has no fixed version. Theoretically, right? Like, I know Art's giving me a nodding head.
Art, you gonna go
Yeah,
ahead?
yeah. So many things. And I appreciate, and I appreciate, I think somewhat to Jason's point, right? My clean, perfect vision of how CVE should work, which is also my opinion, and reality aren't exactly the same thing. So, right, I do appreciate, what's the value of a CVE if no one's going to do anything. But I still fundamentally come down on the side of what I put in chat, and I've had this discussion or disagreement with many, many vendors over the years, and the CVE and much of the CVE program, right? CVE is the catalog, it's the identifier. It is completely independent of there being a fix or who has to fix it in some sense. And I don't think anything but that is a safe way to really base, foundationalize, if you will, CVE. I realize in practice, right, this shows up on the scan, you have to fix it or not, you got to clear your board of the reds, get them to green. Microsoft very specifically, and this is public, right, had tied CVEs to fixes, not the vulnerability. This caused a lot of trouble. So I'll start with that. I missed the beginning, and I happily will read more, Jonathan, or talk to you, but
Yeah.
there could be, there very, very well could be a technical or philosophical debate on, is this a vulnerability or not? I don't mean to challenge you on it or have that debate right this minute. And then sort of CVE rules wise, the rules are in fact being revised. And again, sort of for the good of the CVE program and the planet. Yes, Oracle owns Java. They have a right of first refusal, right? Other CNAs have the option if Oracle chooses not to assign, including, as you found out, Jonathan, right? The MITRE, the CV, let me say the right words here. The CVE program CNA of last resort, which I think is probably where your request ended up. They went and talked to Oracle, had a discussion, decided something. I haven't seen the mail, so I don't know exactly what they've said. But it is still possible that I'll say proactive CNA could assign for this. And it's always a different discussion having the ID out there than having hours of discussion about why should we have an ID. We're talking about a thing. It's that thing, like you said about that Java thing. Let's just put the ID on it and then have the discussion about who should fix it. Should we fix it? Is it a breaking fix? We just need to talk about, we need an ID on the thing. So in my mind, CVE is almost a no-brainer in this case. What to do is an independent discussion, and it's very difficult, I find, for us all together collectively to separate those things. Okay, over.
The argument that I made is that according to the CNA rules, a parent that supplies software cannot override a downstream consumer that also ships that software in terms of the decision of it being a vulnerability. And so my claim was that, basically challenging them on the rules basis of the CNA system, that because I, as an open source maintainer, because according to the CNA like training documentation, they declare what a product owner is, and a product owner over a product can be the person that makes the thing, but also anybody who takes that software and redistributes it. And because I'm an open source maintainer and have redistributed versions of the JDK in products that I have made, I can claim that because of that, I am a software maintainer, or not quite a maintainer, I am a product owner over the JDK, as it is something that I have shipped in products. And as such, I have the right to claim that a CVE can be assigned to it as it is a product that I deliver in open source things that I ship. And I didn't get any sort of feedback on that argument in any capacity.
Yeah, the mouth mute, sorry, the rules there's, interpret the rules sort of discussion, right? Like a legal discussion about how this goes. And then
Well, I was
there's,
rules lawyering and I fully admitted it, right?
no,
Like,
but I mean, there are multiple ways to look at this. And I typically, my position ends up being, if we have a rules interpretation problem or conflict or undesired outcome, subjectively speaking, let's fix the rules, which we are actively trying to do right now. Yeah, so I mean, I'll say this, and I'll not to spend the whole necessarily time on this. What you're describing is a thing I've sort of been through many times, right? From various ends. With my CVE board hat on, I do not like when there is hours of discussion and then an assignment doesn't happen. Just assign it and then have the discussion.
right.
And that's a cultural thing and it's not changing quickly, but I typically choose to fight these cases once in a while to try to see if we can make some progress. So if you want to follow up offline, I'm happy to look at it from any of my CVE hats and see if it's worth arguing about more.
So the board ruled on it, or is the board different? From
No,
the
no.
groups?
I might get the term slightly wrong here. It does not, I don't believe it came to the board. Typically the board does not the board very rarely discusses individual issues like that, assignment issues. The last one I can remember was if you played loud Janet Jackson movie out of a sufficiently powered subwoofer, the hard drive would skip and be bricked. And we had a big discussion about, right, the physical world defeats the electronic world every time. If you have to get into that debate, that might go in the rules. Okay, so there is a piece of the CVE program called the CNA of last resort. It is technically MITRE folks running it.
Yes.
And that role of the program is who spoke to Oracle and probably to you and who you were ended up discussing with. So that's not the CVE board itself. That is the assigner of last resort.
But then I asked,
so
they said, do you want to challenge our ruling? And I said, yes.
okay.
I said, I'd love to present this case to the council. And they then sent it to the council and it got reviewed there. And I didn't actually ever talk to anybody because I thought, oh yes, I'd like to talk to someone and fed it to the case forward.
Sorry.
And you never heard, then here's the
yeah.
ruling.
This is the Council of Roots, perhaps?
Yes, that one. Or
yeah. Again, I am here to sincerely represent the CVE program. I'm not a blind salesperson for it. There is some culture, bureaucracy overhead that is historical and it is what it is. And we're trying to make things not so bureaucratic, but it's a slow process. Let's again, if we want to follow up offline, I'm happy to
online, but but yeah. I am I think that like how the CV system is structured is generally a valuable conversation for this. It's intimately tied with vulnerability disclosure anyway. So, but yes, I'll send you my Calendly and we can chat afterwards offline.
Sure.
So
okay.
Yeah. But Crow, do you have a thing you want to add in before we?
Yeah, I don't know that this group, with like the exception of you and Art talking, is going to be able to help give you an answer for this particular issue. But I think we may be able to more broadly think about this type of problem and start to put our thoughts together. So we have kind of some cohesive thoughts so that as opportunities like VulnCon or the NVD symposium arise, we'll be prepared and able to effectively articulate the perspective and the problem. And, just personally, my organization, I get to deal with all kinds of fun people around the globe. And recently CISA's shift in their guidance, trying to move the ecosystem from a hardening perspective into more of a secure by default perspective. These types of things are going to take change. So, personally, my organization is kind of grappling with, how do we address this new perspective that it used to always be the burden was put onto the implementer or the consumer to configure things to be as hard as possible. But now the perspective shifting that you want things as tightened up as possible. And then you have loosening guide, for example. So again, this is an opportunity for us to kind of collect our thoughts and start to think about how we can present these problems. And back in days of yore, APIs weren't something that a lot of people dealt with, and then poof, the cloud arose, and now everybody's sharing code with everybody else. And it used to be something like internal contracts at inside a network firewall where you mattered less. But now with the emergence of cloud and edge, it's much more of a concern. So you want to make sure these things are hardened, but it's going to take time to move the needle on getting those standards influenced to be more secure by default. So I would urge us to maybe start writing down our thoughts and putting together a cohesive position on this so that we can kind of advocate for moving the needle and making security better.
Agreed. I just want to address the Jason Kurtz's response of so if a CVE, if it's not also CVE, is the CWE invalid? So CWEs are common weakness enumerations, and those are not CVEs, and a weakness is not a vulnerability. I had this debate. There is a CWE, for example, of using outdated dependencies, and so I was of the mindset that like, hey, CVE board, shouldn't there be like this product is no longer maintained CVE at the end of a life cycle of a version range, just so that people know to update to beyond to like a maintained version of a dependency, because like 1.0 is not being maintained anymore or not going to have any security fixes applied to it. And they were of the mindset that no, even though it is a CWE, it does not necessarily mean there's a vulnerability. And also, just because a piece of software is no longer going to be receiving security updates or CVE assignment to it does not necessarily mean that there is implicitly a vulnerability present in that code base. Which annoys me because it also allows, by the rules, the CNAs are allowed to not issue CVEs for vulnerabilities they are made aware of in their outdated dependencies. And so there's a lot of things that just never get a CVE number because the CNAs are like, not our problem anymore. And so end users never get told that they need to update because the CVE system is the thing that feeds the engine and the machine of dependency updating and Dependabot and Renovate and all that stuff.
Well, I think it's related to your API conversation, Jonathan, that there's a new method of development. Open source is a very prevalent model, and dependency management is a constant challenge. So I think it's something we need to look at as an ecosystem and kind of reflect on how we might try to do a little better. And maybe CVE isn't the right mechanism. Maybe there's something else. But we should definitely start to have that conversation and make people aware and get very smart people in the room to start solutioning.
That's it on that topic. Thank you all for your time on that.
Any comments for Jonathan or any other topics you'd like to explore today? Hart.
Hey, thanks. Just a quick piping in here. So last week we came, Arun and I came and asked about our vulnerability disclosure template. So first of all, thanks to Nicole who gave us some feedback. And we just wanted to check and see if anyone else had any other feedback.
I've personally not had the opportunity to look at it. My day job is consuming me. But has anyone else had the opportunity to look? Could you maybe share the link again? And I will commit to give you a solid 30 minutes on Friday morning.
Absolutely. Yeah, I posted it in Zoom. Do you want me to post it in your Slack?
Yeah, let's put it in the meeting notes. That would be super awesome.
Sure. What is your convention for just where should I put it in just the meeting notes section?
Yeah, somebody actually
got
just put it there. Oh, thank you very much.
Somebody linked it, but yeah, it's there.
Thanks.
Yes, he is the best.
Well, somebody pasted it.
He
I just changed it to the name.
Thanks a lot.
Yay, team. But yeah, I will personally take a look at it, and I would encourage everyone else to just carve off a little time to help the community, make the world a little bit better, more secure place.
Thank you all for your help.
You're welcome. Any other topics we'd like to talk about today? All right. Well, I want to thank you all for your kind attention and participation. Remember, Jonathan's got the AutoFix SIG later today. And then Thursday evening is our APAC friendly call, where we hope to talk with our friends over in Australia. So if anyone's available at 6 p.m. Eastern, want to join the conversation with OSV and talk about more vol and disclosure stuff, please join us then. So thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your days. Cheers all.